All right, so what we're going to get started with is what it actually means to unlock your inspiration. So first of all, let's talk about what your inspiration really is. What does that actually mean? There's a lot of different interpretations for that, obviously, but what I'm talking about with this is what lights you up inside, what makes you feel as though you've got a reason to be here. And I know our kids, our families, jobs that we do that we enjoy bring us a lot of satisfaction. And for some people, being a parent may be their inspiration, but I think for many of us, it's something that really travels deep into our soul. So something that we are here to express from a soul perspective. So what we're really talking about today is how to connect to that inspiration, and particularly when you're in a position where you feel that you're able to go out and start making a change in the world. So for most people, this tends to come up when they're in a position to start looking outside of themselves. So once they've worked through the things they've needed to heal in their life, once they've worked through financial difficulties, relationship difficulties, those sorts of things. So generally, this will come up for people when they feel stable enough in their own lives. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to be perfect, obviously. I don't think any of us are. And I think we're all on a journey anyway. So, we're constantly evolving and changing, and our idea of what our inspiration is changes from time to time as well. But this is really a core drive within ourselves, the reason that you've decided to come down and live this life. Now, when we talk about being locked, or why would we need to unlock our inspiration? Why can't we just feel it? For a lot of people, that's because of past experiences that we've had. So a lot of people go through trauma. Doesn't have to be what society would normally consider to be traumatic. It can simply be difficulties during childhood, could be moving a lot, having trouble forming relationships because you've been so used to moving around. There's a lot of things that create stories within ourselves about who we are and what we need to do to fit into the world around us. And sometimes those belief systems that we create at a young age, or as we're growing and as we're becoming adults, don't fit us so well as we move forward. So the fears, the doubts, the insecurities, often people go through trauma and chronic illness as well. I myself have been through trauma, so I certainly know about that one, unfortunately. But I've also been through chronic illness, and I was lucky it lasted for about 12 months. But migraines 2 to 3 times a week were quite debilitating for quite a period of time. And that sort of thing really does make it difficult to get through day to day, let alone really feel what it is you're here for. Now, often what we're here for is hidden underneath that. So once we come through a trauma, once we work out that, we grew up with parents who didn't really listen to us, and so, we think it's really important that kids are listened to. So often the experiences that we have will drive our inspiration and drive our desire to make a difference in the world. But that can also come from a coping mechanism. So your inspiration is there, whether you can feel it or not. And sometimes we go through life and life seems to have been a fairly easy journey for us, and we can still feel disconnected from that desire. So generally, it's hidden behind something else. All right? So now, one of the ways that this can be deceptive is when you're living your life in a way that appears to be successful. So you've got financial abundance, or certainly security, you've got a loving family, you've got stability in your life, relationships that are supportive for you, but you're still feeling dissatisfied. And this is one of the biggest signs that you are not in alignment with your true self. So, for example, when we grow up having had experiences that we've needed to learn from, which obviously we all do, we can learn to cope with them, we can learn to compensate with them. And some of those coping and compensation mechanisms can be the things that actually hold us back from really understanding who we are. So they can be the things that make us successful. So for example, if you weren't listened to as a child, you might be really keen to listen to other people. So you might be a fantastic team leader because you are listening to other people. You're really taking on board what they're saying. you're making sure that they feel heard, you make yourself available. So in a work environment, that can be a really amazing skill. So you're learning how to cope, and you've learned to compensate. You've learned a valuable skill from it, and it gives you the perception of having moved through that adverse experience. But what it's really doing is catering for that adverse experience. It hasn't necessarily released that fear from your body. So you might find that, and again, this is an example, but you might find that in those circumstances, yes, you're really great at listening to other people, but if you get into a board meeting, for example, and people aren't really listening to you, or if you're sitting around the table at Christmas time and looking at the interactions across your family and feeling as though no one is really paying attention to what you're saying, or they're just not getting it, then you've still got that conditioning underlying. So you might have learned to cope. You might be using the skills that you learned in coping to produce amazing things in the world, but you've still got that underlying stress there. So these are the things that can be very deceptive in our day-to-day lives, the coping mechanisms that we come up with that give us the perception of having gotten through, give us the perception of coping really well, and yet still leave us that little bit disconnected within ourselves. So another really great example is those of us that are perfectionists at heart. So we've learned to be organised, we've learned to make sure that everything's under control, because underneath we're afraid of what might happen if we're not in control. So again, potentially come from childhood experiences. They don't have to be traumatic, they're just things that we learn as we go. If I do this, then this is what happens. So all of our coping mechanisms in life can bring us wonderful things, but they can also at times mask who we really are underneath. So does that mean that we're being true to ourselves in living the way that we're living? And I think the main rule of thumb here, from what I see with the clients that I've been working with for a long time, is that when you're being true to who you really are, you will feel it. You won't feel dissatisfied in what you're doing. You won't be looking for the reasons why you're enjoying what you're doing. You won't need to justify to yourself, I've got a great team, I've created this. You will just wake up in the morning feeling how wonderful your life is. And that doesn't mean that you're never going to go through anything again, but it does mean that you can really feel to the core that you are doing what you've come here to do. Now, this is all very esoteric, so it's a little bit hard to make tangible. I hope it makes sense. But to me, when you are living in alignment with your true self, and your true self will change from time to time as you evolve, but when you are in alignment with your true self, you will feel the difference. So if you are trying to be positive, if you are trying to stay focused on all the wonderful things that you've got in your life, and that doesn't mean you don't appreciate them, but if you have to remind yourself to appreciate them, if you need to keep looking for the reasons why you are happy with what you're doing, then that to me would generally suggest that there's something that's not quite sitting for you. So I'll use myself as an example. I used to work in the corporate world, which is a little bit hard to imagine now. I was an information security controllership leader for a really big company, very impressive sounding title, and it was actually quite a stressful role in a lot of ways. But being a people person and being in IT, which is primarily where information security sits, I had to deal with a lot of people who really didn't have great communication skills. So I found it really rewarding to work in that area, to be able to bridge between all the really technical people over here and the board, the CEOs, the other VIPs, and help them understand what technology needed and what the business needed. So technology could understand the business, business could understand the technology. Now, I found it really rewarding. The company that I worked for were really great in recognising people that were trying hard and doing their best. So there were a lot of rewards around stepping up, being responsible, doing your job, which I was all happy to do. So I was being rewarded from a company perspective with bonuses, with being put in high potential programs, leadership training, all those sorts of things. more importantly to me, I managed to create a really great team too. So I had about 6 or 7 people working for me at that time, and we got along really well. We worked well together. We could rely on each other because it was quite a high stress and an area where we needed to be able to react very quickly when there were threats in the business. So there are a lot of things that I could look at in that business and be proud of and feel really good about myself. And for a long time, that was about my ego. Of course, you know, we learn and grow. But even once I realised that and I got past the ego side of it, I realised that I was looking for the things that I enjoyed. So yes, there are a lot of things that I got out of it, but it didn't call to my soul. I knew that there was a way that I could make more difference in the world. And, you know, I was making a difference. I was helping to keep people's credit card numbers secure, keep their financial details safe. I worked for a bank. And that's really important. Of course, that's really important. You know, we're talking about pensioners with life savings. You know, there were lots of ways that I could say I am contributing and I am making a difference. And it's not to say that someone else in that role might have really felt that they were too. This is a very personal thing. It's what drives us from inside and what we feel we're here to do from a soul level. So I started to realise that this wasn't me, it wasn't who I really wanted to be, and it was an amazing place to be at that point. I started retraining and I got to a point where I hit a fork in the road. I could either continue down the corporate path. You know, I was already in the 6-figure salary, so keep increasing that, travelled around the world to get experience with them, you know, all kinds of really wonderful life experiences. Or I could look at, for me, making a difference on a more individual level. So working with individuals who were feeling stuck. And that's where I started to realise this was my calling, for want of a better word. I'm not a big fan of that term, but you'll know what I mean. So it did take a little bit of looking at myself. It took a lot of being honest with myself about how comfortable am I really? How inspired do I feel really? How much am I looking for the things that make me happy? And yes, I could have a wonderful life and be satisfied here, but this direction is really pulling to me, and I could really feel this deep desire to make a difference. So these are the people that I'm working with now, people that are going through this process, people that really want to be making a difference in the world, creating social change, making a difference for other people. And it doesn't have to be healing or coaching or mentoring or anything along those lines. It can be working with people around their fitness goals, you know, helping people realize why they're having trouble holding on to diets, eating in a way that's healthy for them, listening to their bodies. It can be, you know, working with kids. It can be playing beautiful music. You know, I've worked with musicians whose sole desire is about allowing that beauty into the world, expressing themselves through their music and creating that connection with their audience, and then feeling the audience's response. And it's such an amazing thing to think about. So there are so many ways that we can bring ourselves to the world. And I think this is where it's so important for each of us to remember that we are each here as individuals. No one else has had our background, our experiences. No one else has our personality. So there is something very unique that each of us can bring. And this is what I think is really important in the world, for each of us to live in that way, for us to be fully expressed as a soul into the world. So, okay, now hopefully you will all agree with that. All right, so once we know that we are fulfilling that dream, and obviously there are a lot of people out there that do, so I guess I'm so sorry about this buzzing in the background, and there appear to be lots of trees falling down all around us. So I'm getting quite a few warnings from a little app that I have. Okay, so sorry, we live in a bushfire prone area, so these things happen sometimes, but we'll continue regardless. Unless a tree actually falls on my house, we'll be fine. So if you have decided that you are not living true to who you really want to be, then this is what I would like to help you with. This is what I'm here for, and this is what we're here to talk about today. It's like when you feel that burning desire inside and you're not living true to that, what do? How do you make the changes you might need to make to your life? More importantly, how do you make those internal changes that help you get past the belief systems that you have, help you get past the stories that you have that are holding you back? How do you get there to create that life that you really want to create? And it doesn't mean that you need to do this for a living. I think it would be wonderful. Of course, it's great if we can live the life that we really desire and earn that financial security and abundance to go with it. I'm very fortunate that I'm in a position to do that, but not everybody is, and that's okay. I think the important thing is recognizing who you are and living that in your day-to-day life, whether it's through your work, whether it's through the way you interact with friends or family, or even the way you interact with your colleagues at work and what you bring in that environment. It doesn't have to be the service you provide. It can just be the person that you are and the way that you are existing in your world. So the way that I tend to do this, and this is a very similar process to what I take my healing clients through. Now, just to differentiate, my healing clients are people who tend to come to me with either quite chronic conditions, so anxiety, depression, things like Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, ongoing conditions that they have generally tried to do other things around and haven't been able to get there. So I tend to deal with people who have been going through something for quite a while. I also often deal with people in acute situations too. So, someone who's been rushed to an ICU because they had a car accident and they've ruptured a disc in their back and they've been paralysed down one side of their body, those sorts of things. So I often will work quite intensely over a short period of time with people who are going through those sorts of issues as well, and working alongside the medical system. But interestingly, this is a very similar process. So it's very much about looking at finding awareness about what it is that is holding you back. So let's say, for example, you've got a wonderful new business idea and it's something that really does speak to your soul, something that you really want to get out into the world. So a service or a product, something that you're really passionate about and you feel is really driving from the depths of your being, but you just can't seem to get it out there, or you feel like you're constantly up against issues around self-worth, sabotages around money. So, for example, I can't afford to have my website created. I can't afford to hire the coach that I might need. I don't have enough money to get my branding done. There's a lot of stories that people tend to create around their finances, and I understand that. I've certainly been there myself. But there's also a lot of more intrinsic things too. So am I really good enough to be delivering this service? Have I got the background that I need, the training that I need? Am I able to reach the market that I really want to reach? Do I really understand my market well enough? What if I start to put myself into this, but then all this other stuff I've created that currently keeps a roof over my head starts to crumble because I'm not as focused on it as I have been in the past? So there's a lot of stories that we have in our heads around why we can't achieve the thing that we really want to achieve. And there's a reason for that. If we were already ready to achieve it, we'd be doing it. There'd be nothing holding us back. And you wouldn't need to be here on this call with me today. Now, I've been there and I still go there. Every time I take myself to the next level, I come up against new blocks. I think as long as we are evolving and growing, we're always going to go through this. And actually, I'm almost at a point now where it scares me a bit to think that I would ever get to a point where I wouldn't be pushing myself gently out of my comfort zone, because then how would I be growing and changing? Now, I think the really critical thing to remember here is that we do all have blocks. It is a part of who we are. If we didn't have a block, we would already be there. Now, most of us at this point in our lives and at this point in our careers and our relationships have learned how to deal with our stuff. We've learned what types of things tend to slow us down. We generally have a pretty good understanding of the blocks that we have, the type of personality that we are, the types of coping mechanisms we go into. one of my favorites is coffee. That's, you know, I'm a natural therapist, so I know coffee's not great for me, and particularly my body doesn't cope very well with coffee. But I know that that's one of my comfort foods. If I am feeling tired, I don't want to go and eat a whole lot of chocolate. So I would much rather just have a coffee. So I think we all have our fallback coping mechanisms. We all have our ways of dealing with things. And for the most part, by this stage in life, I think most of us have learned our way through them. We've learned how to deal with them. We've learned how to stay focused even when we're tired. We've learned how, you know, I might get triggered because someone's not really listening to me, and it brings back all my childhood memories of not being listened to. So even though I start to feel stressed and triggered, I know I've just got to take a deep breath. Remember, this is my stuff. It's not about the other person. So you learn how to cope and deal with it. The problem with this is, and the reason that I think this holds so many people back from really living their lives true to who they've come here to be, is that all of these responses, whether we've learnt to deal with them or not, play out in our bodies. So when we are pushing ourselves slowly out of our comfort zones to create something new, overwhelm can start to come up. Now, there's a term in psychology. I did psych at uni many, many years ago, so don't take this as gospel because I might have this term slightly wonky, but the intention's there. There's a term in psychology of tolerable stress versus intolerable stress. So tolerable stress is the stress that drives us. It's the, you know, I'm running a bit short on money this week. I've got to pay the rent. I've got to put food on the table. I really need an extra couple of clients. So miraculously, they call. Or I do a big push on Facebook and I get more people coming in. Or I find a way to knuckle down and not spend as much as I need to spend. So this is tolerable stress. This is the stress that drives us. So, you know, thinking back to school days, uni days, I'm sure most of us had those nights we were up right through the night doing a last minute report or a project because we'd left it to the last minute. So, you know, is there anyone else who's never done that? I think everybody I've met at some point has done that. So there's the type of stress that drives us, the type of stress that we thrive on. Then there's the type of stress that sends us into overwhelm. And that overwhelm point will change depending on where we are at a point in time. So, for example, if everything in life is fairly stable, things are going quite well, then you might find that, sorry, I think this is telling me I've got to move my mouse, whoops, or we are going to fall over. Okay, so let's go back to what I was saying. Now, the type of stress that drives us is wonderful, but when we're at times in our life where we've got multiple stresses piling up, so let's say, for example, we've got young kids, we've got financial dependencies on us, and then something happens and our partner's job might fall over, or we might be a single person and all of a sudden we've got a massive payment comes out of nowhere, car breaks down, you know, whatever it is. We go through divorce, we go through stress, things will happen in life, and if they start to pile up, then those stress levels will increase and increase and increase. So if we're also trying to go through change at the same time, we can find we hit a point where the stress is no longer driving us, it's putting us into overwhelm. Now, I've got a little graph that I can pop up at the end to help explain this, if anyone's interested. But really what I'm looking at here is that so many of us push ourselves through the stress that we have. We keep working and we keep trying. And for the most part, at this stage in our lives, we've probably learned how to get through the type of stress that we've got, how to deal with the things that we've got behind us. But there are times where we really want to make something happen. And no matter how hard we try, we just can't get there. Now, what I see happening with so many people is that they've gone from tolerable stress over that line and into overwhelm. And that's the point where we start to see signs that we shouldn't be doing this thing. You know, I'm trying to set up this new business. I'm getting lots of clients coming into my old business. I'm feeling pressure here. I've got all of a sudden my car needs work, or, you know, whatever's going on. All these signs start to come up that I'm not ready for this. This is going to be too hard. And then you start thinking maybe I shouldn't be doing it. But what's really going on there is you coming up against these blocks that you haven't fully dealt with before, these things that are holding you back. So what we need to do is understand what those blocks are. So what are the stories that we're telling ourselves? And why are those things important to us? What are they protecting us from? So again, using the what if I'm not heard example. If I want to get myself out there to create a new business, but I'm afraid that people aren't going to listen to me, even if I don't, I might recognize that on one level, but I might think that I'm far enough past it. I might think, well, that's okay, I'm pretty good at dealing with this. But if I've got this underlying belief system that people aren't going to listen to me, then it's going to be really, really hard for me to put myself out there and feel as though I've got value to give. And it's going to be hard for people to listen to that too. My potential customers will be picking up on it and thinking, probably subconsciously, well, she kind of sounds okay, but there's no real conviction there. It's just not hitting me. It's not gelling for me. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. Now, the problem is when these things are subconscious, often they will be coming from a soul level. So often we're not consciously aware of what comes to us from the soul level, but we still need to be able to let these things go. And this is where the release component of this comes in. And this is the next part of this slide, is how do we let go of these things? What do we do to address them? So, okay, let's assume we're sitting in overwhelm. I'm too scared to put myself out there because of that fear of rejection and not being heard, not being good enough, not having the training, not being able to speak the language that I need to speak to get to my target market. Now, I've just had a very strange thing pop up on my screen. I'm going to continue anyway. It looks like someone's drawn on my screen. So I don't quite know how that's happened. I'm going to take you all off mute for a moment in case anyone needs to tell me anything. All right. So we'll unmute everybody. Is everybody still hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Can anyone else? The blue marks that have come up on my screen, they look pretty awesome, but I've got no idea how they've happened.
Oh, guys, I think it's me. I think it's Courts. I'm at the gym and I just put my phone in my bra and I think it's doing that.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, this first on a webinar.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, don't worry.
Oh me, I don't know.
It's like
I did something too.
Oh no, did you? Hey, look, spontaneity, wonderful thing, and how nice to have that little reprieve of being so serious. That's hilarious. I've got no idea how to get rid of those marks, but Courts, I think you need to find yourself a less hardwired bra.
So sorry, guys.
Slightly radioactive.
There's something that says eraser and I'm trying to see if that will work. I'm just about to get on a rowing machine.
Oh, no.
So funny. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's fine. All right. Well, look, while I've got everybody off mute, just really quickly while I've got everyone off mute, this is my first time using Zoom as a host and I can't see whether there's any comments coming up. So has anyone been making comments in the little chat area that I need to have a look at, or can we wait until the end? Okay, I'll assume from the resounding silence that everyone's all good, and I'm going to mute you all and we'll get back to it. Now, you can unmute yourself. I'm not forcing you to stay muted. So if you do need to voice anything, then that's fine, okay? But we'll mute everybody again and I'll continue. And at some point we'll work out how to get rid of those marks. Very funny. Okay, all right. Okay.
That's how you write a message.
Yep.
Okay, so very funny. They're sitting over the top of everything. All right, so hopefully you can still read what's on the screen. I'm sure you'll be fine. Okay, so we were talking about how to release the stories that you've got, so the belief systems that are holding you back from being who you really want to be. Now, there's a number of ways to do this. We can, just by identifying them, just by understanding that we have these belief systems, we go a long way towards being able to let go of them. By understanding that I overreact every time I try to speak and someone talks over the top of me, or I overreact every time I'm trying to speak in a different language and I feel nervous because it's not my first language, but I know that these are the customers I need to get to, and I've got this idea that if they feel like they're trying to translate a different accent, then they're not going to want to be with me. So there's a lot of different things that go on in our heads, and identifying them, being able to sit with them rather than squash them under, takes us a long way towards being able to let go of them. So for the most part, I find awareness is a huge part of moving through. But it's not always the only thing. And I think this is where people tend to run into trouble, particularly when you're someone that has worked through a reasonable amount of this stuff. It's very easy to think, well, you know, I've worked through this much, I've done this much for myself, this is as far as I can get, this is pretty good considering, you know, whatever. But we want to take into account that when we are clearing things within ourselves, we're not wanting to do it just on a mental level. It's not just about what's in our minds and what we are consciously aware of. There's our subconscious mind that will be playing tricks with us. There's also our body and the way our body responds to stress. So if, for example, you've been through any type of adverse circumstance in childhood, so again, it doesn't have to be trauma. It can be moving around a lot, it can be parents divorcing, it can be siblings being sick and us feeling as though we weren't the ones being focused on. It can be, you know, I've had clients growing up in war zones. There's a lot of things that go on in the world. It doesn't have to be trauma, but anything that creates these belief systems for us, if it's put us into any stress, will also create a stress response in the body. So every time we have that belief system come up, every time that feeling comes back inside us, our body goes back into that response. Now, the longer you've had that belief system and that response mechanism going on, the more effective your brain is at going into it, and it'll go into it like that. So the minute that you feel triggered, your body is already reacting, and your body is designed to react to any form of threat or fear more quickly than your conscious mind. So this goes back to the whole, I call it the bear in the woods scenario, all right? You've got this little part of your brain called the amygdala, which you may have heard of. It's the part of your brain that responds to a threat. So it's your fear center, and it triggers the fear response that runs right through your body. So most of you have probably heard of the fight, flight, freeze response. So this is what the amygdala's job is. It either gets you ready to fight. So let's say you're walking through the woods and a bear jumps out from behind a tree. Now, the amygdala will kick in before your conscious mind gets to do anything about it. So the amygdala will have you pumping with adrenaline. Your cortisol levels will increase, which really sharpens your mind and helps you to retain the memory of what you're doing in this scenario, so that next time you're going to be even better at it. And it gets your body ready to either fight back, run away, which is your flight, or freeze. So if you can't get out of the way, play dead, basically, all right? So your body will respond with one of these three responses by bringing in your hypothalamus, your pituitary, your adrenals. So, you know, for example, what your adrenals do. It engages the limbic system, your parasympathetic nervous system, and your sympathetic nervous system. Now, often your vagus nerve will be engaged as well. And then the way your brain is processing information will adjust. So your body is geared to, there's a bear here, I've got to get out of here, or I've got to survive for the next 30 minutes. Now, your conscious mind doesn't get a look in, because your conscious mind will be there going, well, it's a brown bear, not a black bear. Well, the brown bears are the ones that are friendly and snuggly, or is it the black bears that are friendly and snuggly? Does it look hungry? Does it look like maybe it's just eaten? I can probably sneak away without it noticing. So your conscious mind takes too long to process all this information. Your amygdala says, that's it, we're out of here, or we're fighting if we can't get away, or we're freezing if we've got no alternative. So all this physiological response happens in your body the minute a stress starts to come up. Now, if you've had this stressful underlying belief system, for example, for a period of time, then your brain will have got better and better at taking you through that process really quickly. So again, we take it back to our bear in the woods. If you've walked through those woods before, you've come across a bear before, you knew that running away kept you safe. then your body has already learned this is the best way to keep me safe. So it is going to replicate that every single time. And every time that happens, you're going to get faster and faster. So the neural net that supports that protective mechanism becomes clearer and clearer and clearer over time, which is wonderful when it comes to running away from bears. And it's wonderful when it comes to learning a sport, for example. You know, this is why tennis players practice their strokes over and over and over. As a dancer, we practiced our basics, practiced our basics over and over and over until they became second nature, until I could do a particular movement without having to think about it, because that body memory was so strong. Even now, 20 years later, my body still remembers how to move in that way. It can't do it as well as it used to, but it does remember. So there's a lot of benefits to this mechanism in the body. But when it comes to the things that slow us down and hold us back, this is where it starts to get tricky. And this is where so often we feel as though we are pushing against that brick wall, and no matter how hard we try, we just cannot get past, say, for example, the overwhelm. Now, every time we try to take ourselves out of our comfort zone, we are essentially putting ourselves into stress. So anytime you're trying to learn something new, you're taking yourself into stress, which means that these stress response mechanisms are coming up in the body. So what all of this means is that when you are looking at moving forward out of your comfort zone into something new, into something that you haven't done before, something that you have belief systems that are maybe holding you back around, something, you know, things that are pressing your buttons and making it difficult, even though you really want to do it, you're really pushing against all these things inside yourself. And it's not always just a matter of positive thinking. Positive thinking will take you a long way there, don't get me wrong. And I think without being focused and thinking positively, we're really making things an awful lot harder. So I think that's really important. But it's not just about that. And this is where we often get discouraged when we think, well, I'm doing all the right things. I'm trying, I'm putting in all this effort. I am working and working, but no matter what I do, I just can't seem to get this thing. And it's generally because we've got all this stress online and we're up over that tolerable stress line and we're into overwhelm, and all these mechanisms are going on in the body. Now, I'm talking very much about the physical level because it is tangible and easy for us to understand, but this also happens on other levels as well. So from an energetic perspective, when we go into stress, our energy tends to get stuck in particular areas. We can get aches, we can get pains, we can have all that white noise going on in our heads. So energetically, we can struggle as well. And then even from a spiritual level, from a soul-based level, unless this is your very first time having a physical experience, you're more than likely bringing past experience with you. Now, if your soul is trying to achieve something in particular and trying to learn how to move forward into something that it really wants to do, it is more than likely trying to move past other things from its past. So you might find that you're sitting in your life looking at where you are and thinking, well, okay, you know, I've got everything here set up, ready for me to go. I've got the financial support behind me. I've got the relationship, the emotional support. I've dealt with my stuff, but for some reason I still can't get there. And that tends to come up for people when they are stuck on a soul level. Now, this is a slightly different way of looking at things. A lot of people, because they see the soul as connecting right back to that purest point of source or God or whatever you want to phrase it, that point is all-knowing. So how could we be stuck? But what you've got to remember is that we come down from that point into being an individual. And at that point of being an individual, we have our own experiences, which means that we also have our own interpretations, belief systems, blockages. And as a soul, we are on a journey. We are looking at, how do I create this thing in the world that I want to create? Now, again, exact same principle applies here. If your soul knew how to physically create this thing, it would do it. But if you're having trouble bringing this down into reality, it's because on a soul level, you're needing to move past the things that are holding you back. All right, so hopefully that makes sense to everyone. We'll talk about it, and you're welcome to ask questions towards the end. As we've talked about, I can't see the chat box coming up, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. We'll keep persisting. Now, the next part of this process is where things really get exciting. So once we do learn to release things on every level, and as I said, the awareness and the understanding will take you a long, long way there. And that might hopefully be enough to get you where you want to be. Once you have let go on every level of the things that are preventing you from being in alignment with who you really want to be, then that inspiration just becomes so strong and so crystal clear, because you don't have all these blocks and filters going on. So the more you deal with, the clearer your inspiration will be, and the easier it is for you to just flow into that. So it doesn't mean that this is going to be a very sequential process. So as we go through awareness, release, inspiration, you'll go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So you'll, realize, oh, wow, okay, I've got this belief system going on and I hadn't realized before, and this is where I need to deal with it. And then once you do that, all of a sudden, this whole world opens up to you. So you'll keep going through this evolution as you go. But this is the wonderful thing, and this is where that beauty of life really comes into the way that we live. Now, once we've got that inspiration feeling so strong, then what we need to look at is, well, now that I know what I want to do, how do I actually make this happen? And again, it's much easier to do that once you're really clear and really connected with who you want to be. The creation of it becomes much, much easier. That energy will just flow into it, and you'll find that you can really create. The opportunities will appear for you. You'll bump into someone down the street who says, oh yeah, I was thinking about that and I'd love to invest in what you're doing, or, whatever it is. It's amazing how the right opportunities and the right people just appear because we are aligned to it. We're frequency specific to it. We're vibrating with the energy of that thing that we're now ready to create. And so it starts to flow into our life more easily. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. This is the process that I look at to help people become aligned with who they are on every level, to be able to bring who they really are to play in the world and to create what they're really here to create without being encumbered by old stuff, without being held back by belief systems, and so on. So, okay, so now that basically brings us to the end. Quartz little slashes have gone right over the top of my little healing program thing. Look, this is basically just the way that my business is divided at the moment. My Ignite program is all about what we've been talking about today. It's about how to create that personal transformation from a soul level. So it really does go soul deep, and it really brings it down into the physical. So it's not just lofty ideas and positive thinking. It's about how we actually transform the body to allow the body to support those ideas and those things that we want to bring to the world. The healing program is really more for those who don't quite feel ready to be in that alignment with themselves. So people who are struggling with chronic health issues, things like anxiety, depression, as I mentioned earlier. So that's really a separate section of my business, and not so much what I'm talking about today. But if you are really interested in being able to bring who you are to the world, but you just don't really feel there yet, then the healing side of it might be more for you. In terms of the Ignite program, this is what we do. We really go into that detail of who are you? Where are you holding yourself back? Let's get rid of it. And, we use a lot of different techniques of kinesiology, Qigong. I hand create vibrational remedies to bring you into alignment with where you want to be. And soul conversations. So talking to your soul to understand where your soul's seeing one thing and your body might be over here doing something different, and then every other layer of you in between. So looking at how to bring that whole piece into alignment together so that you are operating as a whole. Your body is not a vehicle, it is a physical expression of who you are as a soul. Now, I'm getting lots of messages at the moment that my connection is unstable. I'm hoping that doesn't mean the storm's even closer. It's actually been calmer than I was expecting. So hopefully you've all been able to hear me with no problem. Okay, so I guess now is probably a good time for us to have any questions.